course of the next few minutes, I'm going to talk through the key findings from our latest report, the Perennials, which shines a light on what it's like to live in later life today. Globally, we're all living for longer, and that we are is a triumph for medical advancement and improvements in living and working conditions. But the sheer rate of change at which the population is ageing is not without its challenges. But what do we mean by old age, and what does old age mean? Well, there's no universal definition about when someone is an old person. Chronological age isn't that much of a useful assessment, particularly given that there are huge variations in life expectancy in relatively small geographical areas. So the London Health Observatory, for instance, calculates that as you travel 8 stops east on the Jubilee line from Westminster to Canning Town, your life expectancy decreases with a year for every tube stop. So you could ask people as well, when are you old? But self-assessment isn't that much of a useful indicator either, particularly as the average baby boomer says that they feel 9 years younger than their actual chronological age. So we put it to the people and we asked them, when does old age begin? And globally, the average answer that came back is 66. But there are some interesting variations in how people answer this question. The first one depends on where you are in the world. So in Spain, they think that you're not old until you get to 74, whereas in Saudi Arabia, old age comes decades earlier at 55. It also depends on how old you are when you're asked the question. So the average 16 to 24-year-old thinks that you are old when you get to what must feel like the ancient age of 61, whereas a 55 to 64-year-old think that you're not old until 72. So old age is something that always happens a few years later down the line. But regardless of where we are in the world and how old we are, there are some incredibly common associations with what it means to be in later life. Now, there are some positive characteristics. So a third of us say that people in old age are wise, a quarter that they're respected and respectful, and 1 in 5 that they are kind. But there are negative associations too, and a third say that people in later life are frail, 3 in 10 say that they're lonely, and a quarter that they're unfairly treated. Taken together, this creates what American social psychologist Amy Cuddy, who you may know from her TED Talk on power posing, creates a doddering but dear archetype which is difficult to dispel and which does people in later life absolutely no favours at all. And it makes all of us negative about our later life. Around the world, only a third of us are looking forward to our old age. Now, there are some significant country variations here. So in India, 3/4 of us are looking forward to our later life. But in Europe, we're incredibly negative about our old age, and perhaps rightly so when we're given how fast the continent is aging. This also makes us worried about what later life will be like as well. Now, around the world, of course, we recognise that there are positives and people identify having more time to spend with the people that they love and on the things that they enjoy. But they highlight a number of concerns as well. And chief among these is not having enough money to live on, which around the world is mentioned by 3 in 10. Health concerns also dominate, so losing mobility, mentioned by 28%, losing memory, which is mentioned by a quarter, and being unable to do the things that I once could, which is mentioned by 1 in 5, as is losing family and friends through death. And this matters because people who are negative about later life on average die 7.5 years before those who think about it in a positive way. But we need to challenge these assumptions about later life because the reality can be really quite different. Take, for instance, happiness. Most Western studies show happiness as being like a shallow bowl, with people who are in their 40s and 50s as the unhappiest at the bottom. So they're the people who are raising their children still, they're still in work, they're perhaps looking after aging parents, but happiness levels actually increase from your mid-60s until at least your mid-70s. If we take connectedness as well, now of course there is still a digital divide, and in the UK, of the 4.8 million people who've never been online, 3.8 million of those are aged over 65. But the gap is closing, and we find on a variety of measures that people in later life are much more likely to be techno-optimists than their younger counterparts. But it's in the field of relationships that there are perhaps some really interesting findings. So first of all, there's the rise of the silver splicer in the UK and the US, where divorce rates among the 60s, people in their 60s and over, are on the increase. There are various hypotheses as to why this might be so. People have suggested it could be due to the increasing economic independence of women, through to rising longevity, prompting people to sort of look at each other at age of 60 and think, I'm not really sure I can take another 30 years of this. But there are some other interesting things as well when it comes to later life, because what it means is with these increasing divorce rates that there are more people back on the dating market and absolutely not giving up on love or sex. So in the US, 2 in 5 of those aged between 65 and 80 are sexually active. In the UK, we found that 1/3 of those aged over 60 are happy to put out on a first date. And this is perhaps fueling the rise in STI diagnoses, which have risen by more than 1/3 over the last decade between those aged between 50 and 70. Final thoughts are that our perceptions about later life are out of line with reality. For many people, later life is a more connected, happier, more interesting time than it's given credit for. The second is that old age differs depending on who and where you are. There's no universal definition about when it is that we are old. And the third is that there are massive implications of our aging society for policy, for businesses, and for our own lives. And we all need to think ahead and prepare for later life if we're enable us to make the most of it.